Yeah, and I see you.
Well, there's 5 other people on the call.
Okay, well, I only see you. And
Okay.
If you click on gallery view, it should give you everyone. Gallery view, the upper right-hand corner of your
Yeah,
screen.
you could.
gallery view, there we go. Oh yeah, there you are.
If you
There
click
you
on
are. I
gallery
see.
view,
I see everybody.
gallery view, the upper right-hand corner of your.
Yeah,
Well, Stephanie, you've been on these calls. Should we get started now or should we wait a little longer?
The upper right-hand corner. I think you might want to just take a minute and let the people who are on introduce themselves, and then you can start right after that.
All right. Well, why don't you start? Introduce yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, hello and good morning, everyone. I'm Stephanie Myers, National
Hold on,
Co-Chair.
Stephanie, sorry. Let me get back over there so I can start the recording. Make sure.
Okay.
Oh, it's recording now. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephanie Myers, and I'm National Co-Chair of Black Women for Positive Change. And we also have a wonderful network of good brothers who are part of our organization, and people who in fact are not Black. We're multicultural, interfaith, men and women. And so we're very glad to be with you this morning. This is our 9th annual Week of Nonviolence. And each year we choose a different theme. And this year we chose the Week of Health Empowerment, Nonviolence, and Opportunities. So we're talking about a whole range of issues that lead to violence. And today, as we learned last night in a panel led by our Phoenix organization, because of the pandemic, violence is growing in households, domestic violence and anger and people being quarantined and that kind of pressure. So we want to talk about interventions and solutions to try to change the culture of violence in America. And changing the culture of violence is absolutely critical. Our country was born into violence. The genocide of the Native American people, the slavery trade, where our ancestors were brought here and kept in slavery and violence, and even the white Europeans who came here as indentured servants, they were put in the roles of overseers and police and wardens. And still today, the white European indentured servants are also culturally violent. So we have to change all of this, and that is our mission. And now, Lisa, I'd like to ask Marquette to talk about the survey because Marquette Shepard is assisting us with the survey. Marquette, would you come on and talk about the survey?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I have posted in the chat box a link to the 2020 Week of Nonviolence survey. Dr. Stephanie and I have talked about everyone pretty much has been affected by violence at some point in their life. They've seen it, they've experienced it, whether it was out in the public or private. And so there's a 3-minute survey that you can take part in after this call. But what we're going to do is collect all of the information and take it to organizations who can help analyze the information and make next year's and future weeks of nonviolence more impactful. So please take the survey, share it with your friends and family, and anyone who's concerned about making a difference in this world. So it's in the chat box, and I'll post it again towards the end of the presentation.
Thank you. So thanks to all of you for being here. We appreciate your participation.
Who would like to introduce themselves next? Judy? Well, I tell you what, I'll go. My name's Lisa Hughes. We do this peace dialogue once a month. I think 1 month we did the storytelling animal. This month we were doing difficult conversations. It's an introduction to the book, and I have my worn copy of the book. I've been working with this book for about 20 years. It jumped off a bookshelf at me, a library bookstore, when I was dealing with my dad and dementia and how to have conversations around that. My background is a bachelor's in American Studies, master's in organizational management, and 6 certificates in mediation to find out that I am not a mediator. Okay. However, I was called in my practice as a consultant, as facilitator. I always got called when people were having difficulties. They were having difficulties getting together. They were having difficulties working together. And so my theme was communication, trust, and teamwork. How do you get people to work well together, even when they have differences? And this book is a very good book about how to have those conversations. And that's what I want to do, is kind of go through and hear what you have to say. What conversations are difficult for you? Who makes a conversation difficult for you? And how do you deal with it? And this book walks you through approaches, skills, structure. And so we'll have that conversation, hopefully that dialogue today. Does anyone else like to introduce themselves? LaTanya? Judy?
Hi, this is LaTanya. I will. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm LaTanya Mathis. I reside in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a registered nurse with a master's degree in informatics. My focus is quality and again with informatics. And I've been a part of the discussions, if you will. This is the fourth year that the Black Nurses Association of the Greater Phoenix area that we've participated in the Week of Nonviolence. And it has been such a pleasure to be a part of this group and seeing as though that we deal with our communities across the Phoenix area, being able to provide resources and information. We don't do any clinical treating, if you will, as it represents the Black Nurses Association. However, being that resource and encouraging people and empowering people to be advocates for themselves when it comes to their health. And as Dr. Myers mentioned, this year and with the focus of, we've been in this pandemic here, so we actually held an event last night which kind of spoke to how do we move forward in this pandemic, with the health disparities that we deal with. So I'm happy to be here today and looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Now, all I can see is the six of us. Is that all that's on the call, or does anyone else want to introduce themselves? Okay, let's go.
There are 11 people on the call.
Oh, there are 11
panelists and some are attendees. So you may not be able to see the attendees, but they're there.
Thank you. Well,
and more people are joining.
Would like to introduce yourselves, to kind of speak up. I can't see everyone. I'm going to stop. I will walk through it, stop, ask for questions, ask for your thoughts as we go through the slides today. But this is really covering the book. The book was written by the Harvard Negotiation Project. And in the chat room, I believe there's a link. If there isn't, I'll put it in there, a link to a worksheet of how you go through conversations to do it well. My first question, though, when you're looking, and what you have a picture of is the book, is first of all, take notes. When you think of a difficult conversation, what comes to your mind and who comes to your mind? What are your concerns and what do you hear or what do you fear in difficult conversations? What worries you most? Because mostly what makes the conversation difficult is we're afraid of something, we're concerned something's going to happen that we don't like, we don't know how to bring it up. What's your tendency when faced with a difficult conversation? Assertiveness, avoidance, confrontation, accommodation? Do we want to collaborate and cooperate? Do you see any kind of patterns in the kinds of conversations that are difficult for you? With authority figures, saying no, talking about politics or money, negotiating for yourself as opposed to on behalf of someone else. Do you see a pattern and what's the source? So the first question is, how do you define what's difficult about difficult conversations for you? And if anyone would like to speak, you can either speak or you can either put your notes in the chat room.
I would like to share a difficult conversation with me has always been advocating for myself. It seems easier to speak up for someone else. But as I'm growing and learning and getting older, I see the importance of advocating for myself, but I would like to do it in a way where, it's nuanced. You don't want to come across the wrong way, but you also want to get what you want out of things, especially when it comes to business. So I'm interested in learning some skills on how to use more soft power, I guess you could say.
Soft power, I like that. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I usually count about 6 and then we'll move to the next slide. Difficult conversations, the potential benefits to you. It helps you set standards for engaging in difficult conversations. Like when you were talking about self-advocacy, what are some of your standards? And you can set some standards for doing that. Let me move the picture out of the way. increased understanding of yourself and others, self-awareness and empathy, handling difficult conversations with greater comfort and skill. You develop resilience. You can bounce back. It doesn't set you off balance and make you crazy when you have to go into these tough conversations. What are some other benefits you can think of for you in learning how to handle and how to conduct difficult conversations? Okay. Think of them, take notes, write it down. What is your usual approach to a difficult conversation? I have done years of doing conflict training and conflict models, so I'll not throw not too many of them in there. But if you're familiar with Thomas Kilmann conflict modes, that model says that we're either going to assert ourselves, or we're going to cooperate with others. My needs met, your needs met, either or, which translates into competing, accommodating, avoiding, compromising, or collaborating. So you think about that. But what do you fear in difficult conversations? What worries you the most? What's your tendency if you're facing a difficult conversation, difficult situation? Do you avoid it? Do you confront the other person? What's your strategy? And you can take notes on this. We can talk about it or not, but what are some of the advantages to your approach? Some of the disadvantages or risks? And do you see any patterns in the kinds of conversations that are difficult for you? And I kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but I wanted you to see the screen and to see the questions. Again, I'm waiting. I'm pausing after each slide, so if anyone has anything to say, jump in. I always ask people when I do workshops or conversations or even dialogues to try to focus on things. So what would be your focus today? Yogi Berra, one of my favorite sages. You got to be very careful if you don't know where you're going, because you might not get there. So what would be your focus today when you're going through this difficult conversations? Mine is always love, joy, justice, and peace. I want to live in love, joy, justice, and peace. When things come up, that's how I want to deal with them. Wisdom, heart, and spirit. But what's your focus? If you have 3 things or 1 thing that you want to walk away with today, what would it be?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Hakeem Muhammad from Howard University.
Okay.
I think one of the things I'd like to do is, how would I be able to express myself in a passionate way without offending someone with my tone or how I may come across? I think that's a struggle for me.
So how to be passionate and not offensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm writing these down so that hopefully if I don't address them, someone else in this panel, in this group will address it too, so we can remember what everybody's focus is for those who choose to share it. I like that. Anybody else want to share your focus? Okay. Now we're going to go through, and I'm going to go, this book is not a very big book, but it's a very powerful book. This session is just to go through an overview. So I'm going to kind of walk through the concepts in the book and the ideas and structure. The structure of a difficult conversation starts with the what happened conversation. What happened are the facts of what happened. We have to look at, when we're talking about facts, is it a fact or is it an assumption? Is it a fact or is it the way it impacted us? Intent versus impact. I may be walking through a door and get slammed in the face because the person in front of me, walked through the door first. They didn't maybe mean to break my nose. They didn't even know somebody was behind them. The intent versus impact. What did they intend and how did it affect you? So we're looking at the impact and the impact that we have on other people. How do we frame ourselves and think about things so that intent and impact are in harmony? And blame. I'm right, you're wrong. That's the end of it. If you hadn't done this, none of this would have happened. So when you think about what happened, to clear up the assumptions, the intents and impacts and the blame, and try to look at the facts of what happened, what really happened. If you had to prove evidence, if you had to give examples, if you had to show that it was true, could you do it? So what happened? The next conversation, and again, this is a high level overview, is the feelings conversation. A lot of people I have learned don't know how to identify their feelings. If anybody wants, I put my email address in the chat room. If anybody wants, for example, I have a feeling wheel. There was a group I used to deal with for a number of years, and you would ask them, how would you feel? Well, I feel like they shouldn't have done that. That is not a feeling, that's a thought. Feeling is about, I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm sad. And there's a feeling wheel that shows lots of different feelings, but how do you feel about it? Acknowledge your feelings and be willing to discuss your feelings. And let me say now that these conversations we're talking about, the first conversation you have is with yourself. The what happened conversation, I gotta get clear about what really happened from my perspective. I need to get clear about how I feel about what happened and what feelings I'm willing to share with anybody, but just get clear about it. And the third conversation is the identity conversation. What does this conversation say about me? What kind of self-image? What kind of person am I? What do I like about myself? What does this say about me? My self-esteem and balance. I don't want to let a difficult conversation knock me off balance, get me angry. I'm upset, I'm angry, I fight. I get into name calling sometimes. What are your issues? So that you want to maintain your sense of identity. I'm the kind of person who, and I'm not the kind of person who, and live with that identity as you have that conversation. What I have found before we go further, and in the book it does recommend, that the first thing you do is figure out, you're about to have this conversation, what makes it difficult for you? Ask yourself that question. Then when you get into the what happened, actually write down. And in one model I have tells you to do it 3 times. Your first idea of what happened. Well, my husband just won't wash the dishes and he keeps calling me names and he keeps saying I'm lazy and that's what happened. And then the second time, well, he really didn't call me any names. And maybe, that's kind of my history. And, so, but you get into that and the feelings, how do I feel? I feel angry, but take a deep breath. And then your identity, what does it say about me? And I'll give you my practical examples. My dad, he had dementia. What happened is I was smelling urine on the sofa. He was living with us. I was mad. It's like, oh no, how do I get him to stop? And I felt mad and upset, but he had dementia and my identity, well, it was my home. I had to keep it clean. The second conversation I had was, what would he say if I asked him what happened? He would tell me, I moved from my home of 50 years. I'm living with my daughter and she's picky. How does he feel about it? He was angry and tired of me. And his identity is, I knew her from before she was born. How dare she? When I had that conversation, I decided I wasn't going to have the conversation with my dad. And I asked my husband, who is a different, practical, more like my father. He went in the room. Within 10 minutes, my father had agreed to and was happy to wear a bigger diaper. But my real feeling was I was heartbroken because my father had dementia. And all those other feelings were coming from that. So I would have had an argument, not a difficult conversation with him. So you have to think about it. And a lot of times, half the time when I have these 3 conversations, and this is also in the book, you don't need to approach the other person because you've cleared it up and it's really all about you and what's going on in your life at the time. But if you decide to go ahead and have the other conversation, what you want to do is create a learning conversation where you have what they call it the and stance, where you include your thoughts and feelings, your what happened, your feelings, your identity, their what happened, their feelings, and their identity. And then in order to do that, you need to be able to listen to what they have to say, to speak for yourself rather than to walk in and say, you made me do so-and-so. If you hadn't done this, that, those kinds of things, you say, I'm feeling a little upset because we had an argument yesterday. And I think you're feeling the same way too. You want to talk about it. That's the listening and speaking for yourself and not accusing and blaming other people. And then use your skills. We all have skills. And what you might want to do is take an inventory, a skill inventory, and write down what skills do you have that you could use in a difficult conversation, given what you know now. And now I'm pausing. Does anyone have any thoughts, anything that they would like to share with the group? Any questions?
When you say use your skills, what are we looking for with the skills?
Okay, when you think about a difficult conversation, you think about these things. What skills do you have that might improve your ability to have or to enter into this difficult conversations to do this? For example, even though I have decided that I don't do dispute resolution very well, I am a trained mediator. I also am a trained project manager. So I went into a certain, again, my dad and his dementia, and they weren't feeding him at the hospital at one time because the scheduling got off. And so rather than go in and start accusing, I knew I had read this book. And again, I just walked in and asked a question, you know. So I noticed that it doesn't look like my father's eating and he's chewing on his hand. Why do you think that's happening? So that's one of my skills. Everybody doesn't have the same skills. My husband, who has different skills, would have gone in and said, he would have looked at the schedule on the door and said, you know, there's no check mark by lunch. Did you feed him lunch? That he would have been more direct with it. But still, so what skills do you have that you think might help you enter in and engage a difficult conversation, given what you know now? A lot of times we don't think about our skills, so do skills inventory. Is that helpful? Angela, was that a helpful answer?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else have questions or ways of, we can answer each other's questions. It doesn't have to just be me. You all are a knowledgeable, experienced group. Okay, next slide. Forgiveness and letting go. I like this. There are only 2 books I have read deeply that talk about forgiveness. This and Desmond Tutu's book, The Book of Forgiving. In this book, it talks about forgiveness and letting go as a way of bringing our grudges, our resentment, and our anger into these conversations. We forgive so that we get all that stuff off our shoulders and we can have a conversation that's respectful to all the people and all the parties involved. Keeps us clean. It does not free people from responsibility. You can forgive people. I tell somebody I had an auto accident in January, and the lady, it was her fault. And she said it was her fault, and I forgave her, which allowed me then to pursue. But still she got a ticket. I still went to her insurance company and got paid. I still got a new car out of it. So forgiveness doesn't relieve people from their responsibility, but it does relieve us from a desire for revenge, for anger, for retribution, for those kinds of things. And this book talks a little bit about that too. Your thoughts? Questions, comments? Okay.
I've heard that the part of forgiveness is some people struggle with is not forgetting. You can forgive but not forget, and sometimes I think that may overlap with a person's willingness to let go. And I just want to know your comments on that, because I know a lot of us struggle that. I know I even struggle with that as well. Is that, you know, you want to try to forgive, but it's very difficult to forget, particularly when the episode or the moment is so present and consistent in your life. So just wondering how we.
There's a quote, and I was looking up the source of it, but one person, the quote is that forgiveness is not forgetting, it's remembering differently. And once you get a sense of, I was taking class years ago, and the professor did not like how the class was reacting to this one person. And his statement was that if you could see, and this is this old, if you could see that person's life as a movie from reel to reel, okay, so I don't know, you know, and you knew, you may not like them, you may not be able to even respect and honor, but you would know why they're doing what they're doing. And you would be able to, again, let go of your rage. You would remember it based upon who you know they are. Maybe with some sympathy, maybe with some humility, maybe not liking them. So maybe if we could remember things differently, and after you have the difficult, you get to know people. When I was in the mediation class, the one I really like, and there's a book on it, Transformative Mediation. When we feel empowered and strong and healthy, we look at the world as other people. We may not like them, but we can respect them. And forgiveness, Desmond Tutu says, tell your story, name your hurt, forgive them, and then restore or release the relationship. Do whatever you're going to do. And John Lewis, and I'll stop talking now, but I remember John Lewis was sitting in his office and he showed this video. And this man who had been a Klansman brought his son with him. And he had beaten him on the Pettus Bridge. And the man walks into his office, and he was in Congress by now, and asked him to forgive him. And John Lewis looked at him and said, I forgive you. And then they both hugged and they cried. And then John Lewis looked at whoever was holding the camera and said, I'm free. Our grudges don't hurt. My mother used to say, you're holding a grudge and you're all mad, and that person's skipping on down the street. And so can we remember differently? Can we, Jesus on the cross, forgive them for they know not what they do? I think a lot about forgiveness, because for me, it's a freeing kind of thing. They're still responsible, they're still accountable. They might still have done the wrong thing, but they were born into a culture, a situation, a family that they maybe didn't choose. So that's how I deal with it. But to free me as much as anything else, so that I'm not running around with a whole lot of, I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Lisa, this is Dr. Myers. Okay, Hakeem, go ahead. Say what you were going to say. I'll come after you.
Oh, I'm just wondering, Dr. Myers, can you forgive, but you choose not to have that person in or around your life, and you've chosen to forgive them in a sense from afar, maybe from a internal point of view, but you choose not to have them in your life at all. So you say, well, is that not being free or freeing of the forgiveness? I'm wondering.
I will add this. That's the comment that Desmond Tutu makes. That's his process for forgiveness. Tell your story, name your hurt, forgive them. Then you decide if you want to restore or release the relationship. And it's okay, according to him, to release the relationship, to let it go. I don't know, Dr. Myers, you want to comment on that?
Well, yes, and I appreciate the high level of moral standard that it takes to do forgiveness. I was recently in a conversation from one of the pastors from Mother Emanuel Church down in Charleston, South Carolina, where there was the mass shooting. And the church congregation decided to forgive the young man, Dylan Root, who did the shooting. I'm still not there. I think that when you have evil people who commit deliberate evil crimes against people, it's hard for me to find a basis to forgive them on, because they did it deliberately. Now, if they're mentally ill, or if they've been abused as a child, or if something horrible has happened in their lives and they're just acting out of emotion and it's not, something they deliberately intended to do. Okay, I understand that. I'm there. I forgive that. But we have a whole group of people who are mean and deliberately mean. How do we forgive deliberately mean people who intend to harm us?
Most of the time we don't. And there's a prayer at the beginning of the Book of Forgiveness. I recommend that book highly. It's Desmond Tutu, that his daughter says. And the prayer is, and for those that, God help me forgive. I am not ready. Help me forgive them. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I forgive her, because I don't. I'm just saying what the process is and how we can approach it and think. And it's not a one-shot deal. And maybe we never get to a point where we can forgive certain things and certain people. The point in the book is that if you can, it makes it, you are a clearer thinker when you're moving into this learning conversation, because we are listening to the other person and including their perspective. And if you think you can't, probably with somebody that you're totally alienated from, you're not going to have a difficult conversation. You can think about what they might think, but we can work towards that, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't know, again, I'm not saying I've forgiven everybody and everything, but I do like that prayer. I'm not ready,
If I may, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, even with regard to our people, particularly what's been happening lately. Seeing Brother Floyd, murdered, and Breonna Taylor, and over again, we see it over and over and over again. And that, we are very warm people, as you know, and forgiving, but it continues to happen, and yet there is no justice in that. And so there has been that school of thought that, we forgive so much that we forget about what justice is like for us, because we're so eager and wanting to forgive, and yet it continues to keep happening, as if there's no respect for us, because there is that feeling that, respectful people, now again, so-called word, do not allow hurt to continue happening, but there are those who keep forgiving, and as if they have no memory of the hurt. So you just continue to forgive, and the injustice keeps happening. So I don't know. I just want to hear other thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'll say one quick thing, and then I want to hear other people too. But forgiveness does not mean that people are not accountable for what they do. You can still forgive people and hold them accountable for what they did and for what they're doing. That forgiveness. You can forgive them in terms of my heart, I forgive, I let go of my anger, my grudges, and I still want to see justice done though. And so you still take those steps. Anybody else on forgiveness and letting go, or anything we've talked about?
Yes, this is Marquette. I think Mr. Hakeem brought up a really good point, and it reminded me of a history lesson I learned about, since we just passed Indigenous Peoples Day, Christopher Columbus in his diaries, when he first landed in the western, part of North America and the Caribbean, he wrote about the friendliness and welcoming nature of the people, the indigenous people here. And when he wrote back to Spain, he said, or Portugal, where he said, this is going to be easy. The people are really nice and welcoming. And when you think about people of color, Latinos, African Americans, and I grew up in Los Angeles, lots of Asians, very welcoming, invite you into your home. You always get a hot meal, even if you're a stranger. We are taught to be, I think, as a culture, it's a high point in our culture. We're taught to be welcoming and forgiving. But I think Miss Hughes, Miss Lisa, you make a good point. Forgiveness does not mean being a doormat or open trust. And somehow I think the message has gotten muddied over the years. So how do we, in difficult conversations, recognize that we've been hurt by society or a person, coworker or family member, but then also put them on notice? I am not a doormat. This will not be, this will be dealt with, I should say.
Okay, here's, I want to kind of move into a little bit more, because part of difficult conversations, a huge part of difficult conversations, and we'll kind of move into the three conversations, because what happened, this difficult conversations includes everybody, okay? And a lot of times I will speak for myself, and I'm not talking historically, but even historically, when you all talk about that, the other thing that comes into my mind is the tribes back on the continent who sold our ancestors into slavery because they were tribal, they weren't racial, so there's a whole lot going. But anyway, you look at the whole story rather than get into historical. Difficult conversation is explore each other's stories instead of attacking theirs and defending yours. Stop arguing about who's right, and continue this conversation, because this is all part. I assume that I am right and everybody else is wrong. I mean, I do, just that's my first assumption. Without knowing the history, without knowing anything. I'm reading letters from my father from World War II. He had a pastor that defended and explained to him why we needed the Ku Klux Klan and separate but equal. So it's interesting stuff, but exploring each other's stories instead of attacking theirs and defending yours. Stop arguing about who's right. This is the premise of this book, is that we have to include it all. Disentangle intent and impact. Don't assume they meant it, or don't assume that you know what they meant, or that they assume that they know what you mean. Assume positive intent. You can't always assume positive intent. I see that in. But disentangle intent versus impact. And then explore what each side contributed to the situation. Abandon blame, give thanks, map the contribution system. So you're looking at a difficult conversation, you're usually looking at a specific situation. Something happened. What did you say happened, and what might they say happened? And here the and stance. When you're starting the conversation, you include it all. And that's, for me, very difficult to do, because quite honestly, I know I'm right. Okay, and my husband would tell you. But so if we believe, and there was one church I was in and they came to me after we had our initial conversations and said, Lisa, well, can you get those people to sit down, listen to us? We're hurt, we're angry, they've done us wrong. Can you get them to listen to us tell that? And I said, on one condition. And they said, what's the condition? I said, that you would do the same for them, that they get a chance. We never had the conversation, they walked away. So just remember that when we're doing this, initially, we're including everybody's story. Everybody's, because we know our side, but we don't always know theirs. Does that make sense? I'm just asking. Comments, thoughts. We think we know theirs, but we don't always know them. unless they tell it to us. We don't know it.
Hi, this is Judy.
Yes.
It seems to me that forgiveness has nothing to do with blame. You don't have to assign blame to forgive. Forgiveness has to do with freeing, and forgiveness does not eliminate the need for justice or the need for accountability or the need for any of that. But forgiveness is an internal thing for the person who's been wronged. If you feel you've been wronged, that's like a chain around your neck, you know. And in order for you to pursue justice, which is something that is necessary and something that should be pursued, in order for you to pursue justice, you first have to break that chain around your neck and not focus on the wrong that this person has done to me, but focus on what needs to happen to restore justice. Don't think about, for example, if you in an abusive marriage, say, if I have been, if my husband has knocked me around and put me in the hospital or whatever, my hating him, my resenting him, my wanting to hurt him does not give me justice. What will give me justice is for me to focus on my hurt and the need for my restoration. And in order for me to be restored, I have to release that resentment because it eats you up. I have to release that, and I have to pursue the justice that I want. And the justice that I want and need depends on how badly I've been hurt and what my options are. Now, if I'm in an abusive situation and I've been hurt and I married this man, my options are first to get him off my back. And that means having him, having him put away. If having, calling the police, but that's not an option usually, because the police just contribute to the injustice. So in my situation, that would be getting away from this man and seeing to it that he cannot hurt me again as much as I can. And I need to focus my energy on seeing that I received that justice, and not seeing that he pays. It doesn't matter whether he pays. What matters is that I am restored as much as I can be restored. That's the way I look at forgiveness. It's a matter of looking for restoration. Now, if justice is restoration. Now, if I can be restored and made whole, or as whole as possible, then that's the best justice I can get. And that will enable me to release the chain of resentment and hatred that's wrapped around my neck. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Judy.
It's interesting.
Anybody else? We go back and talk about forgiveness. It seems to be an important concept here today. Any other comments?
Well, the last thing I'd like to say is that I know there's a great deal of us who don't feel that forgiveness can be restored until justice is done. And I know there's a great deal of us, people who feel that way. I don't know.
No, that's okay. You're challenging me, because I do believe at an intellectual level, I get it on an emotional level, but I believe, this is why after all the riots and carrying on the 60s and the Vietnam War, when I went to college, my major was American Studies, how we all came together to form America, all the awful things that happened, all the good things that happened. So I'll go back to exploring each other's stories. And knowing that we're hurt and knowing there's forgiveness, but at the same time, on the other side, they too get hurt. So it's complicated. But anyway, to move back into the book, exploring each other's stories instead of attacking theirs and defending yours. The first thing we need to do is, first of all, get our story straight. What is my story? Why, what's going on from where I'm sitting? Because the first thing we do is explore it ourselves. Intent versus impact. The impact on me was this, that, and the other. But is that what they really intended? Am I taking my impact on my history? Is it coming from my family? Is it coming from where is it coming from? And did they mean it? They might have meant it. I mean, it might have happened just the way I think, but it might not. And explore, but my story. Don't assume they meant it, but you can still say what happened. Whether they meant it or not, it happened. And explore what each side contributed to the situation. Abandon blame, just say what happened. And then we'll discuss once we get into the other stories, and give thanks. There might be some good stuff that happened too. And map the contribution system based upon this first conversation I'm having with myself. Maybe my contribution wasn't anything active. Maybe it was I was silent. Maybe it was I was afraid to speak. Maybe it was I didn't clean up my own act. So there's a contribution system. If everything's going well, we all contributed something to it. If everything's going awful, we all contributed something to it. So think about what the contribution, what we might have contributed to this difficult situation. So anyway, that's the what happened conversation. And your version of what happened, and they have their story about what happened. And the thing to do, which is very difficult, is to listen to their story respectfully. Whether you agree with it or not, whether you believe it or not, listen to it, because that's their story. If you want to have a difficult conversation and move into a learning. If you don't, then this is not the process. But if you do, then that's what we need to do. Thoughts or comments on what happened, just the facts. If you're old enough to know there was a TV show on just the facts, but what happened? And that's the structure, basically, of the what happened conversation. Again, feel free to chime in anytime, because I think you all have a lot of profound things to say. The next conversation is the feelings conversation. Identify and acknowledge your feelings first to yourself. And again, I have been in lots of groups. And first thing, I feel like they should have done something else. So there is, A, it's not a feeling, it's a thought, and B, you're blaming somebody. So you're not really acknowledging your feelings, and it's not helping you or anybody else. I was angry, I was sad, I was frustrated, violated. Discuss your feelings first with yourself, and then navigate and negotiate wisdom. Why do I feel this way? Well, because everybody treats me like this. Well, is that my feelings are based on what happened, or my own sense of self-esteem and how the world sees me? And be prepared to discuss their feelings once you get clear about yours, because you're going to open this conversation so they too can talk about how they felt. And are you, in your sense of feeling, be able to detach enough to hear what they have to say, for me, without interrupting them and disagreeing with them, and, but to just hear it, just to hear it. Any thoughts, comments? Are y'all getting to hear what's difficult about these difficult conversations? Paying attention to somebody else, so I know what's going on. So, and then the third conversation, have your feelings or they will have you, is the identity conversation. Ground your identity. What's at stake for you? What does this conversation say about me? It's like those people, you have to tell them how wrong they are, and they have to listen to us. And it's like, whoa, and what if they have something to say to you? So we have to be able to give and take. Our self-esteem, and our balance. We can't let this conversation throw us off balance and make us crazy. And, take a deep breath and say, I'm going to listen, pay attention. I'm still a good person, so are they. One way or maybe they're not, but we'll find out. Thoughts about identity. The word complexify. To be able to really hear and see another person as a human being who didn't choose where they were born, who didn't choose a whole lot of things, just like us, but we are where we are who we are. And for whatever reason, we think this is an important conversation to have. So we get to speak, we also have to listen and respect them as fellow human beings. Not easy sometimes.
Lisa.
Yes.
Lisa.
Is that Carol?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
This is Cravel. I've had a terrible time trying to do this Zoom thing, but anyway, I think I might be here. I can hear you. A confusing thing to me is read this book a while back, and I love it. But okay, they talk about the 3 conversations, but a lot of times in a conversation, it seems like the identity and the emotion completely stops one from getting to the facts.
Yeah. That's why we have the feelings conversation before we have these are the 3 we have with ourselves first, before we get into it with the other person, so that you can kind of ground your emotions, understand how you feel, and decide which feelings you want to share and which ones you don't, and which feelings are maybe legitimate and which ones are coming from somewhere else, projection, something else that happened, someone else that happened, or even if that's how we feel, to be able to express that when it's appropriate in respectful ways. Does that make sense? And if it derails a conversation, maybe this wasn't the time or place. I mean, it's not going to be a perfect, difficult conversation. So we deal with what we deal with as respectfully as we can.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's just it's conundrum to me. How to get to, I love to just get to the facts. I'm a let's get down to the nitty gritty person, but other people, they need a lot of this identity and feeling stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I guess I feel like I don't know how to do that with them,
Any thoughts or suggestions from anyone? She's coming up as Lisa Hughes too, but she's Carol Crable. So thoughts about that?
Well, I'm going to jump in again. I think if we go back to the actual conflict, and I think one of the first things you have to decide is whether conversation is what you want to do, because a hen cannot have a conversation with the fox. That's not going to happen. There will be no conversation. There will be annihilation, most likely, for the hen. Now, if you have been wronged by someone and there's a huge imbalance of power, I don't see how you can have a conversation with them. You cannot have a conversation unless both sides want to converse. And if there's a power imbalance, then I think the conversation you need to have is with yourself, is how do I deal with this situation to see that I have the justice of restoration first for me. And then hopefully, maybe because I'm a Christian and I want justice to be done, universally, maybe I next want to ensure that this person who has hurt me receives a restoration. But first, I have to get my restoration. I have to be restored myself, and I have to release my hatred for this person, because otherwise I will never be restored. And then I have to pursue justice, so that and hold that person accountable, because without accountability, there's no hope for that person. They're just doomed. They're just going to go. They're the person who is oppressive is wrapping themselves in chains while they're wrapping you in chains. And if you can break your own chains to release the resentment and find a good place for yourself, then I think that's your first responsibility. And I think forgiveness is a big part of that, because that's how you release the chains that hold you.
Yeah. I don't know. They should call it, again, this book is called Difficult Conversations, assuming that, but that's why you have the first conversations with yourself, Judy. I agree to conversation I want to or can have with this other person. This is not this is not the approach to take. That's why you have it with yourself. And if it is, and that's the next decision, that's why I showed the next slide, to talk or not to talk. And here's what's your purpose, but you raise a good, what's the situation? Is it a safe situation? Will difficult conversations really do anything with it? And if it won't, don't have one. But you at least by that time have processed your feelings, the situation, what's going on, the consequences, all of those things. And if you decide that you can have a learning conversation with this other human being or with this other group to share, to understand, to learn, to teach, to vent, to judge, to fast fix, make sure I have the whole slide. Then maybe it's not the thing. If you don't feel safe, then no, don't try to have a conversation. If you can't release your anger and you're going to want to just beat them up, then no, this is not the approach. So this whole first piece of it is to decide, do you want to have, do you think you can have a safe conversation with this difficult situation or with this difficult person? Does that make sense? Any other thoughts or comments about this?
I think there's a point to have a conversation. I agree with the previous sister said, but I think if your intent was to teach, and it was sincere from the very beginning, and then you get to a point where the other person completely doesn't see your point or disagrees with what you're saying, I think it gets to a point where you have to shut it down because they may not want to hear it. For example, a person who may be a Klansman, and they decide to get into a discussion. He has his view, you have your view, and it seems to be a teachable or teaching moment on the front side, but as the conversation gets more intense, it gets to the point that there's no use to go forward because he's not going to listen to anything you're saying, and you're not going to accept what he's saying. And so at a certain point, it has to just be shut down, as far as I'm concerned, or just you choose to either walk away or just end it. So that's just the way I kind of see it. I've been in those kind of situations before.
And in the book, it talks about this not being so much of an event as a process. And so we learn and we try, and we learn and we try. And maybe in that conversation with that Klansman, you just have to abandon the conversation. At the same time, did anything come out that caused you to think or reflect or pause? Or did you learn anything from the experience of the attempt? Does that make sense?
It does. But I can't see what I can learn from a Klansman. I can't. I get your point. But
well, yeah. Well, yeah. I hear what you're saying. Anybody else?
Well, even Jesus, when he sent the disciples out, he sent them out by twos, and he said, you go into a town. If they welcome you, you stay there and you give your message. If they don't hear you, then you leave and you shake the dust off your feet. You don't say, oh, no. Well, listen to me. This is you don't push and push and push. If they don't accept your message, then you go on and you fulfill your mission, which is to, in a general sense, which is to bring justice to the world. But these people here, you can't do anything with them, and you just move on to accomplish something that is accomplishable.
That's right.
And
here's my hope, and forgive my sense of humor. I will ask for forgiveness already from y'all. But maybe when you have that conversation with that Klans person, you all disagree and you walk away and there's frustration. Maybe that was their first and only time to have a conversation with the Black person, with the Negro, with the colored guy, with the African American. Maybe not in that moment, but maybe later, instead of hanging and killing, maybe they do something else. I mean, you don't know. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we don't know. Even though you don't finish the difficult conversation, you maybe gave them exposure to something they've never had before. Maybe you got some exposure, because there are Klans people who have left the Klan. And there was a number, I wish I had it off the top of my head, a website that helps people like that get into normal society who want to leave. So, you know, you don't know, I guess. I know that's an exception, and I'm good for exceptions and wandering off the track, but we don't know. You don't have the difficult conversation. You have the experience. It's not successful in your point of view in that moment, but we don't know how it affected the other person. Back to difficult conversation. So that's the thing. To talk, once you've done your self-examination, you've thought about it, you try to talk or not to talk. What's your purpose? When to raise it? When to let it go? And you all are bringing up some good times, but maybe you just let it go. This might not be the way to approach things. So how do you create a learning conversation? Excuse me. I'm going back into what's more normal, but you start from the third story, the and stance. And that is to, my husband made me do this once because I'm a trained mediator. Lisa, we're having this argument. Well, I want you to take this argument and pretend like you're a mediator. And I thought, wow. So what I had to do was say, well, we're having this argument about you believe this, I believe that. We both think we're really, really right, and yet we still need to resolve the issue. So why don't I listen to what you have to say, and then you listen to what I have to say and see what we hear. That becomes the third story. It includes everything. That's a very difficult thing to do because a lot of times we want to start, well, you know, you crashed into my car and now I'm going to have to get a new car and I didn't want a new car. And I know you didn't mean to. And that's how we approach the story. We think we're doing it. That's not the third story. The third story is completely neutral. Now I'm right, you're wrong, completely neutral. We both agree. We want to have this happen. We have differences about it. Let's talk. You go first. That's kind of the third story. Then listen, we talked about this earlier. When you listen to what they have to say. And it's hard to listen without emotion, without judgment, without, for me, I'll speak for myself, it's hard for me to listen with all, but we have to listen to what they're saying and what their point of view is. And then when you speak for yourself, not you did this and so I'm angry, or I know you didn't mean to do this. I mean, we're being kind, but we're still accusing them. But this is what happened. We both agree. You want this, I want that. It's for yourself. I feel a little bit uncomfortable having this conversation. I'm wondering if this is a good book for this group. House than ever. You're here, you're participating, I'm glad. I would like to hear from more of you. At the same time, speak for yourself and do what you think you need and use your skills. And that's what you do. What skills do I have? What skills do you have that would help to create a learning conversation? One of my friends is very good. She's very good at listening and summarizing and doing the third story piece. So I like it when she's in a group because she's good at saying what we all heard without offending anyone and including everybody's point of view. So. The other piece of a learning conversation, I don't know if we get into it, no. The other piece of a learning conversation I want to bring up is that the contribution system. And I want to know what you all think about this because the contribution system says that if things are going wrong, no matter what they are, if things are going wrong, we all contributed something to that problem, to that situation. If things are going right, we can all take credit for something that we did. We all participate, we all. So that is the piece that we need to think about when we're creating the learning conversation, not blaming, but just understanding that everybody contributed something and that's okay, but put it on the table. And then when we want to move into our solution, we know what we're facing, not who did what to whom, but what we're facing and what we could do better, how we could improve or create a new situation or whatever we need to do to make the world a better place and to make the situation stronger, better, healthier for everybody. Your thoughts?
Lisa, I might have to get off just for a minute, but I'd really ask the group if you all would please talk about how does this translate to young people? How can adults teach young people the same principles that you've been talking about? Because we know we have adult issues that we get into with others, and that's a level of conflict and back and forth. But the children, where and how do we teach the children to be able to avoid some of these confrontations? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. And to what she's saying, one of my thoughts or suggestions for this is to learn it well enough to model it. You know, children kind of pay more attention to what, I don't have kids, but from what I understand, what we do than what we say. So how do we treat each other respectfully, even if we don't do all of these steps? You know, can we to listen? For me, how can I learn to listen to somebody I disagree with that without interrupting them and telling them how wrong they are?
Yeah, this is Marquette. I have a 6-year-old son, and so I'm very conscious of this. One thing that I notice is if kids' needs are met, they are a lot more agreeable. And I had an instance on a playground where DC is very mixed, like as far as social, status. I went to this playground where I noticed this little toddler was in the playground by himself, and his mother was off in a corner of the park doing God knows what. And my son, I always have food and snacks for him. He sleeps a lot. I'm just constantly caring for him. And this little 3-year-old ran up to me and grabbed my bag of snacks and just was fiery eyed. And and took it and ate it. And I was like in complete shock.
3-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, he must have been 3. I didn't know him at all. But I thought with a lot of the violence in schools, I wonder if the kids are hungry, tired, afraid, not getting some basic human needs met. And in that case, going back to what you said about the contribution model, I don't know if every time there's conflict or violence, if really everyone contributed to it. I think there are sometimes senseless acts of violence.
Yes.
And you go back to that quote by Trump, where in Charlottesville, he said, there's blame on both sides. That really got a lot of people up in arms. And I have difficulty accepting the everybody contributed to everything.
Understand, Marquette, I'm going to ask you to do this and everyone. Understand the context of this book, to be quite honest, is not the violence that we're seeing.
Okay.
The context of this book is normal human beings who are disagreeing.
One-on-one interactions, okay.
But no, but what you're saying is absolutely right. This would not be necessarily the model for that, or the contribution system might be not the individuals involved, but society and the cities where they live and you know what I mean? And
okay, so going back to that 3-year-old, like I had no idea when I was walking into that park, I was going to get my snacks stolen by a little kid.
There you go. There you go.
But then I thought afterwards, I started packing more food. And if kids were hungry, and I know you're not supposed to do that, but I started giving kids who were hungry, if they saw my son eating, I started giving them food. And you're not supposed to do that because you don't know if they have allergies or anything. So it's kind of like you're stuck.
No, Marquette, I'm telling you, I remember when I was young, my father had a paint store on Mount Vernon Avenue. It's a Black area in Columbus, Ohio at the time. And he would feed people. He wouldn't give them money, but they were hungry. He'd take them to the restaurant. Anyway, this little boy would be begging. And he came and begged, and my father went and bought him groceries, okay? Social worker came in. I wasn't 12 years old yet. Social worker came in and told my father off, laid him out. Because how are they ever going to get this man to work or whatever? People were buying food. I mean, so I hear what you're saying. It's like, oh no. I can't but
yeah.
Difficult conversation is.
So for young people, going back to what Dr. Stephanie said, I think when it comes to young kids, they need their need modeling. I agree with you, but also these kids, especially in public schools, because in private school, you don't see fights and hunger because the parents have the means to send their kids to this school a lot of time. But in public school, these kids are hungry and tired.
And maybe the difficult conversation we have is not with the kids, it's with the systems that create these situations where you have tired, hungry children. And I don't know necessarily how to apply this book, but one of the things you do that this book teaches in those situations is that before you approach the legislators, the leaders, the principal, whomever, you have this conversation with yourself. What are you thinking? How do you feel? What's your identity? What's going on? What might they come back with? And what might they think? And one of the models I like, it tells you when you're talking to somebody like that, You listen to them and invite them to tell you, because that's where you learn where they're coming from. You learn how to deal with them a little bit better, is that you listen and listen and listen, and then you give it back to them so that they say, yeah, that I wish I had said it that way, you understand. And then when you understand them well enough, then you can begin. But if you just go on the attack, we don't have an advantage. We need to know who we're dealing with. And most mediation books, most conflict books will tell you that. Even if you're not trying to have a difficult conversation or a learning conversation, if you're going to go approach somebody, you need to know where they're coming from. And a lot of times we don't listen long enough to know where they're coming from. You can feed the child and bless you that you did. This is the system, the situation that allows this child to be hungry. Don't get me started. It makes me so angry that should never happen. But if I want to change it, I do have to understand the other side. If I really want to, because that's how you then can begin to deal with them. If you don't, you're just having an argument, and that doesn't help anybody. Everybody's standing fussing at each other. Rah, 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 rah. And if you look at, I don't know if you've looked at Dr. King's website and he gets into the Bluff community, but that's what he did. He learned the other side. He learned what they were thinking. He learned, and he taught people how to resist. And he taught people, he didn't just go in and start fighting and arguing with them and telling them off and accusing them of things. Does that make sense? Marquette, I'm asking you, because
Yes, no, it makes sense. And I'm the type of person, just so you know, I don't want any conflict. I can see it coming. I can pretty much, because I spent many years as a journalist. So when you interview people, you end up being able to read people really quickly and really well. If I see the drama coming, I'm already looking for an exit before it gets there. I don't want to argue. I don't want to fight with anybody. So yeah.
We all do what we can. If you're a journalist and you fed that child, that was wonderful. Seriously, because a lot of people was, too bad, hungry kid, too bad to say.
I looked at the mom. I made up my mind about what she was about, and I was like, I'm not going anywhere over there. You can have my snacks. I'm not going to fight with this kid. I would rather not be in conflict.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why I do these books and all that kind of stuff, because I know it's going to happen. I just have to figure out how to do it. Anybody else? And we're going to kind of go down because we're getting to the forgiveness and letting go, and we talked about that. And if you want the slides, that's why I put my email address. If you want the slides or anything, you're welcome to them and some things. But the price of grudges, we carry these gunny sacks on our bag and we're loaded down. And like our mother said, the person that we're mad at skipping off doing whatever they're going to do harm in the world. Questions, insights, implications, what now? So this is a very, very, very brief oversight of the book. And what do you think? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What are your experiences?
This is Judy. One of the questions that on the screen just before this one was, what do you give up by forgiving? And an insight, at least for me, is you don't give up anything by forgiving, because forgiveness does not mean, lack of accountability or lack of justice. What you give up by forgiving is the agitation and the upset and the pain and the anger in your own heart. You give that up and replace that with a commitment to bringing justice. That's a good trade. And you sleep better at night if you're not. If I'm really mad at somebody, and all I can think of is what they've done to me, and I'm mad and I want to do something about it, I can't sleep well at night. What I need
and they're sleeping just fine. That's
well. What I need to do is give up that anger and give up that resentment and replace that with a commitment to do justice. And to see if justice involves accountability, if justice involves restoration, do justice, commit to do justice, and give up the resentment and the anger. And of course, that's easier said than done. But you feel a whole lot better. Prayer helps. That's a big thing for me. So
I agree with, I think it was Judith saying, this
yes,
is Marquette again. One thing I'll say, one thing that we didn't talk about, but is a huge thing for me, is being an African-American professional. Many times I've been the only African-American in the room with my role in my position. Most recently, I was the only mother on my team, the only woman, the only African American woman. And what I have dealt with is people just angry that you're there, that you're just there. and
Yep.
and would rather just focus on my job, but half of the job is difficult managing your staff, bobbing and weaving from colleagues who are on the same level as you, who struggle with respecting you, because their only interaction with an African American mother may be someone who's in a service position. And now we are colleagues at the same level. And in some cases, dealing with men who are at a lower level, or women who are at a lower level of many backgrounds, and they can't handle an African American woman professional having to answer to. So, like, my life may be different in terms of, I guess, street violence that's seen on the news. But when you get into a corporate setting, it's verbal abuse, it's minute microaggressions, maybe not under the violence category in a broad sense, but you are very much bobbing and weaving and using your mental astuteness to move through subtle aggressions.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wrote a whole essay. Judy, we're in a writing group together, and it's all on difference. Everybody, oh, you're different. Oh, the only reason you're here is you're a two-foot. You're about, we all have we all have different gifts. Back to inventory your skills. How did you deal with that, Marquette, when that happened?
Well, it helped that I had some support within the organization. What I have learned to do is be creative in, I've learned, I think about how am I going to respond to someone, and I don't put everything in email. If it's a difficult conversation with a colleague, I pick up the phone or I go see them. I try not to answer people right away. Yeah. And then sometimes you're just kind of like, you can, it's a toolbox, right? Yep. Sometimes I avoid people and that works. If somebody's persistent, then you got to deal a creative way to respond to them. You got to find your allies. Sometimes there's strength in numbers. If 2 or 3 people are telling one person the same thing, they'll get it more. But there's always something. That's what I find. There is always something or someone who's challenging you on every level. So you got to be smarter.
Well, see, I have a gift. And my father noticed it years ago, and he gave me a little postcard, and it was about, it's not that I'm not listening, I'm just ignoring you. I learned to ignore a lot of stuff. I went back to the original because a lot of times in those situations, having the what happened, the feelings, and the identity conversation, if it's something that's really bugging you, if it's the normal stuff. But yeah, you think about, I entered the workforce in the 70s, and I was always the only one. Just about always the only one. And you're saying, I had one gentleman, I was teaching a class, one of my stories, and he said, well, AT&T isn't hiring white men anymore. And he's in a class with me and one Asian lady and another lady, and all of the rest of them were white male new hires. So you just I just ignore them. You just throw the facts back at them, say, okay, look around you, see what's going on. But I am a human being first, but everybody takes a different way. And that's why inventorying your skills is really important. I'm good at ignoring stuff, moving forward, and then asking questions. Well, Lisa, this is the perfect job for you. Tell me why. Well, they have never hired a Black woman. They have never hired a woman. It's like, and so you think a misogynistic, racist place is good for me? Well, no. So I would always that was one of my skills. So what are your skills in dealing?
I think young people, maybe in college, in high school, I wish I learned everything on the job, right? Nobody sat me down and said, well, going in there, it's thrown at me. So what I would hope, or I could hopefully give back one day in some way, or other Black professionals, talk the real talk to young college students. And I hear a lot, speak up. No, that is not the right thing to do. If you have a problem at work and you're the only one, you need to quietly strategize on how you're going to overcome it, or quietly strategize on moving on to the next opportunity. But very rarely, speaking up helps you. It puts a target on your back. Talk about the difficult conversation should be when you secure your exit strategy. Okay, I'm quitting. That's the difficult cut to me. But speaking up with no strategy of higher up support or anything like that, that's one thing we have to tell young people. No, strategize, have a strategy for how
I guess I'm doing this wrong, but anyway, I'm trying to get back my slide. It doesn't matter. It's interesting the way you say that, because again, we all have different experiences, but the most successful thing I could do, I guess I didn't care. When I came, I get a job when I leave, and so I wouldn't be disrespectful, but I would ask, so why do you think this is the perfect job for me? If they've never had a Black woman, they've never had a Black person, they've never had a woman, they've, to give them the feedback. This is what you said, I'm just giving it back to you. And this was management, and I had, and my mother was sick, and it's, 2-day drive from my mom, and that's why I came here in the first place. Tell me again why you think this is a good idea. And my boss at the time couldn't, and so he dropped it. And I had a reputation for doing that kind of stuff. It's not going to get mad. She's not going to call you racist. She's not going to call you sexist. She's just going to ask you a bunch of questions and ask you to, And as far as other people, as one guy told me, I act like I was white. And I said, no, I act like I'm a person. So use your skills, whatever, and those were my skills. And I think they were kind of afraid I might sue them if they really got on my nerves. But use your skills, whatever those skills are. And how can you, back to the difficult conversations piece, and I still believe this is, and that's why I like this book. If nothing else, where are we? If nothing else, what's your focus back to in your work and in your job? And I had a Black woman do that to me one time, blew me away. It was a consulting job. I had called, she knew I was waiting in the waiting room. She came down to meet the consultant. She stared around me. She stared up around me. She walked around. I finally held my hand out and said, I'm Lisa Hughes. I didn't know you were Black. You don't sound Black on fire. I said, what? I'm the person in the waiting room. Who else am I going to be? So it's that kind of thing. But to look at what's happening, how do you feel about what? And I think the feelings conversation is really important. How do you feel about what's happening? And what does it say about you? And is what happened, your feelings, the same as their what happened or what's happening? Because a lot of times it's not. And if you can even speculate or have the conversation with them, it can be helpful, or just have the conversation by yourself. What would they say is happening? Because it's empathy, it's respecting yourself, and it's respecting other people, and not making a lot of assumptions about why they're saying and doing things. And when is it important enough to raise the issue? Because I get what you're saying. I mean, I worked for a number of companies from the 70s through this year. And yeah, you're right. It is.
You're a trailblazer. I think it's good to hear you talk. I wish I would have met you 10, 15 years ago.
No, I'm not necessarily a good example. It's,
webinar. This has been great. And I may have to jump off, but I really appreciate the content, and I think it needs to be shared.
Well, Marquette, what I'm learning from you is that we're still on this journey, because if they're still acting like that now in the workplace, that's not right.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah,
we still have work to do.
Well, Ms. Hughes, if I may,
yes.
I just like to add, I agree with you and the sister before. I've been there. I've gone through that in the 70s myself, and I agree. I know there was a point I was the only one there, but what I found is, again, what I would say, I had to speak my own truth, and I had to stand for who or what I was, and that wasn't confrontational. And my strategy was that I was going to be there as long as I was going to be there. No one was going to force me out by showing an example and speaking my truth to power. And what ended up happening, and I've been in many situations where I was the only Black that was there, and by my example, then they came around. I didn't come around. They came around to respect me for who and what I was. And ultimately my strategy was to have more of people of color in. And because of my example, and I didn't back down and I wasn't afraid, then I had made an impact in getting others who look like me or who were people of color into the company. So, it's out there. I mean, yes, and I think that's the journey in life. You're going to have folk who are going to not like you for whatever, but you have to be true to yourself. And there are going to be times you can't back down from confrontation, that you have to stand for who and what you are. And I have a thing I go by. It's not what they call me, is what I answer to.
Stephanie was starting to call. Yeah. Okay, bye-bye. That was Stephanie. I told her we're still on the call, so she's, thank you, Hakeem. May I call you Hakeem?
Absolutely, sure.
So much, no, I'm amen in you. Amen, amen, amen. We have to be who we are. Because there was one book, and it was years ago, and I'm trying to think. I can't think of the name of it, but it talked about, people aren't going to like you because this, and because that was the different essay. Every time, oh, you're different than the rest of them. How many of the rest of them do you know? Whoever they are, I might be the only person they know. Well, how do you know? I mean, from the time I was a child, you go into situations, and one little girl, oh, my mother, you're acting like all the rest of them. Like, the rest of who? So we're not different. You just don't know anybody, like us. But yeah, you have to speak your truth, and you can't let people intimidate you and make you afraid to be who you are, whoever that is. I think. Anybody else want to comment on this? Because we're pretty much done with the, I always at the end of the workshop to ask people, we've heard the conversations. Do you have any questions? Do you have any insights, implications, and what now? Now, if you want to join the November Peace Dialogue, then November will be to take this book and say, walk out into the world and practice whatever things that we want to practice and come back and talk about, give feedback. How did it go? And how was it? But any thoughts now, reflections, thoughts, comments about this or anything else? Stephanie, are you back with us? She said she's back on the call.
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're about to close. So do you have any thoughts, comments, anything to share?
Okay. Were there any responses to my question before I had to jump off about how we teach children and youth?
Marquette, do you want to talk about that? You did have some things to say.
Oh, yes. We talked about it a lot. We talked about, fulfilling young people's needs on a basic level first. Like, is it Maslow's pyramid? Is it Maslow? I forgot.
Maslow's hierarchy, yeah.
Yeah, hierarchy of needs. And then Miss Lisa talked about modeling as adults, the behavior that you want to see.
Okay, well, I just think that's a really critical area, because if we're going to have de-escalation and change the culture, we got to start with the young people. And they do a lot of, confrontations, a lot of fighting.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining. I hope that it was worthwhile for you. I enjoyed listening to what you had to say. So.
Yes, well, thank you. Very interesting conversation. And we will post up the tape from this conversation so people who weren't able to join us will be able to hear. And that's really great. And thank you so much to Charlene Ligon for providing the technical support and taping the session. And she was taping it over Facebook or YouTube or both. And she does all kinds of interesting technology things. So thank you.
We'll see you next time, or hopefully at the next session. So.
And tonight, let me just give a quick ad that tonight we have Does Hate Begin at the Kitchen Table? And for all the people who are at this session, hopefully you've been receiving the notices, but you can go to our website, weekofnonviolence.org, and scroll down and you'll see the events posted. And the event tonight, Does Hate Begin at the Kitchen Table, will really kind of continue on this conversation, Lisa, just in a different way.
Yeah, I will be
We have,
there. I am going to that event.
Yeah, we have faith leaders who are going to be discussing it, and it should be an interesting conversation.
And just a reminder, everyone, the survey link is in the chat box. If you'll see it, if you would help us out, it's a 3-minute survey on how violence has affected your life. And we're going to use this for future research. And I've been posting it throughout the session, but I just wanted to say, if you can take 3 minutes to fill it out, send it to someone, it's going to help, I think, the greater good in the long run.
Well, thank you. And we'll see you at the next event, huh?
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.